President Cyril Ramaphosa will meet his Botswana counterpart Mokgweetsi Masisi in Pretoria later this morning. They're expected to discuss ways to strengthen the political and trade relations between the two countries. The two leaders will preside over the fifth session of the South Africa-Botswana Binational Commission. For more on this story, we spoke earlier to our international reporter Kaya Kumalo. We're crossing back to him live now. Kaya, what's the latest?
Well, that's right, Desiree. So there is a great deal of expectation as the two leaders will be meeting. In fact, we just received a confirmation that President Masisi just touched down here in South Africa. And of course, he has been received by International Relations and Cooperation Minister Naledi Pandor. So there's quite a lot really for the two countries to look at in terms of fortifying the bilateral relations. There are about 30 agreements and other memoranda of understanding between the two capitals. And in fact, it was quite interesting when the two foreign affairs ministers met yesterday. They really spoke about the impact of COVID-19, how it's disrupted their program, but now they're really having an opportunity to look at all these very outstanding issues. But of course, South Africa and Botswana are really quite a lot in common in terms of the cultural affinities, geographic proximity, and of course, anchored in the historical background where at some point the two countries were fighting, and of course Botswana having been that independent country back in the 60s and accommodating some of the South African freedom fighters who were running away from apartheid regime. But Desiree, now I'm going to bring my colleague Samgile Masega into this conversation as well. So Samgile, quite a very important day between these two leaders. Previously, the two leaders who met, former President Jacob Zuma and former President, of course, Khama in this regard. So quite a very special moment between these two leaders today.
It's quite a special moment between these two leaders, looking at the historical relations of the two countries and the intricate relationship that they enjoy and have, and how they've been able to assist one another in times of troubles between these two particular countries. We look at the current issues facing Botswana now, how President Cyril Ramaphosa is integrally involved in trying to resolve the impasse between former President Khama and current President Masisi, whom we've just said has touched down on South African soil at one of the airports at Ora Tambo International Airport, where Minister Naledi Pandor is there to receive President Masisi. So it essentially tells you that it's quite an important relationship. You look at the number of meetings that have been held over the past 2-3 years between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Masisi, and some of the issues that have been raised: trade relations between the two countries, issues of migration of the two countries that are currently facing them, issues of corruption that are facing the two countries, particularly when it comes to heists and to the bombings of ATMs. And Minister Begitele in essentially illustrating that crime is not an issue of whether you are a foreign national or not a foreign national. Crime is simply crime. There are criminals who come from Mozambique, there are criminals who come from Zambia, there are criminals who come from Malawi, there are criminals who come from South Africa, from far-flung areas such as Ngutu as well, whom were recently found in the raids that were done in Rosettenville, where those whom were planning to do cash and transit heists were caught by that specialized team of South African Police Service. It essentially tells you that these two countries have a lot of issues to deliberate upon, and the issues of international relations and cooperation that intertwine the two countries, where you've had the two ministers whom were meeting yesterday and having those deliberations, particularly after the economies of both countries were ravaged by COVID-19, and how President Masisi, even during the course of the week, was addressing the nation in Botswana, speaking of issues of the economy of that particular country, how they revive the economy of Botswana, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's the same issues that face President Cyril Ramaphosa, where you've got an economy that is currently tanking in South Africa, that is not doing very well, that needs to be revived. You need to reindustrialize the South African economy as you do so as well in Botswana. So it tells you of the linkages between the two countries and the devastation that we've just recently had through the KZN floods, how that also impacts the goods that come in through the Durban harbour that must go to other SADC countries and to the rest of the African continent, whom will also be affected by what has been done with the floods and the devastation that has been done to the Durban harbour.
And obviously one of the ministers who will be attending this session will be Minister Aaron Motsoaledi. We know currently in South Africa the issue of immigration, it's quite a hot potato where we've seen on social media really all kinds of things being expressed. Do you think this will afford South Africa and Botswana an opportunity to try and deal with this long-standing issue?
It will afford South Africa and Botswana that opportunity to deal with this long-standing issue, and how Aaron Motsoaledi, the Minister of Home Affairs, has been so hard-hitting and essentially saying that South Africans are fed up when it comes to the issues of foreign nationals being in the country illegally and committing to crime and not adhering to the laws of this country, which they wouldn't ordinarily do in their own countries. And you've got a minister and a member of the highest decision-making body of the governing party of the country who is so forthright when it comes to the issues of foreign nationals whom are doing wrong in the country and whom are illegally in the country, to a point it got to where he said South Africans are quite frankly fed up. Those are the words of Minister Aaron Motsoaledi. Some of those sentiments being said by Minister Aaron Motsoaledi may not be particularly be enjoyed or be welcomed by some foreign states, who may say the minister is xenophobic, the minister is targeting foreign nationals, particularly with Operation Dudula that's currently going on in the country. As you can see, the President Masisi and President Cyril Ramaphosa are about to arrive at any point in time here at the Department of International Relations. So these are some of the intricate issues that they will be deliberating upon when it comes to the issues of migration, immigration, and foreign nationals between the two countries, whom are in these two respective countries, and how Minister Aaron Motsoaledi has just out of nowhere been so forthright and so frank. Some have even likened his words to the former Johannesburg Mayor, Herman Mashaba, who essentially said that foreign nationals who are illegally in the country must leave.
But also quite a very busy schedule for the president. Well, we saw him really focusing a lot on the domestic issues with the issue of floods in KwaZulu-Natal, and it was quite interesting to hear Botswana's Foreign Affairs Minister Kope also extending his condolences, talking about the impact of climate change in Southern Africa and really just sending his words of sympathy. But now the issue of the president, we know this is quite important for his foreign policy, but competing as well with the domestic priorities that he must really work hard in terms of fixing in this regard.
Yes, indeed. The president is faced with a number of issues, particularly one that comes to mind on issues of climate change. You'd remember COP19, which took place in Durban at the Durban International Convention Center, and how issues of climate change were raised back then. You fast forward many years later, has really climate change been brought up to the fore by those whom have been elected and who are public representatives? Do they really consider issues of the planet? I would beg to say no. Issues of climate change have been a back burner, particularly when you look at the devastation in KwaZulu-Natal currently. It's all due to climate change, but very few public representatives, politicians, ministers, mayors, deputy ministers, MECs, very few of them actually speak about climate change and how it actually impacted and affected what is currently happening in Durban. You look at how there is huge migration into the urban areas in South Africa. You look at how the population in Gauteng has just grown. You look when you go towards the Free State, when you pass areas such as Orange Farm, you look at those areas where informal settlements have now essentially been formalized, with those people growing their shacks in numbers. You look at the influx of people into areas like Alexandra. Storage, our infrastructure can no longer handle those people. It's the same issues that affect Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. You look at how the harbour has been devastated and destroyed during these recent floods, which will affect trade within South Africa with those produce and imports that are coming into the country, which are meant for other countries like Botswana, which there will be a delay now for them as we try to reconstruct the harbour. Just this week, the Minister of Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel, was in Durban with the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, having a meeting with the leadership of Transnet, trying to sort out on how they will rebuild the port of Durban. You look at how they're also trying to expand the harbour in Richards Bay. You look at how the President Cyril Ramaphosa was supposed to go to the port in St. John's this week, which was later on postponed to a later date, and the devastation that's already there as the government officials and the bureaucrats in the Eastern Cape try to cobble up and to research and to see how that port was destroyed by the floods that recently hit the eastern coastline of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. So essentially, when it comes to the ministers of the economic cluster in South Africa, they have a hard time speaking to their counterparts on the trade relations between the two countries, knowing of the devastation that has taken place in the ports of this country, and particularly the third biggest port within this African continent, which is the Durban port.
And just before I release you, Sam, obviously a dominant issue that has really been making headlines undoubtedly will have to be former President Khama, who's in a self-imposed exile in South Africa. As much as it's not really a main issue in terms of the bilateral relations, but certainly once the leaders meet somewhere, it's going to come up.
It will definitely come up, and it will definitely be a discussion between the two presidents, President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Masisi, knowing very well that if tensions were to further escalate in Botswana between the predecessor of President Masisi, which is President Khama, from President Khama, it will have some ripple effect to the SADC region, to South Africa as well in particular. So he will definitely take up this particular opportunity that has been presented within this binational commission to raise these particular issues with President Masisi, how they reach an amicable solution to the impasse that has risen within that particular country, and how former President Khama has essentially said that the political situation in Botswana is unbearable. There is a political onslaught against him within that particular country. He has sought refuge in South Africa, self-imposed political exile within the country, but it is a contentious issue, and you do know President Cyril Ramaphosa's negotiation skills, particularly how he resolved the tensions in Lesotho with then Prime Minister Tom Thabane, and how he was heavily involved in the Lesotho Highlands project as well. So it essentially tells you that he will have to put on that negotiation cap that he's been loaded with in trying to resolve the issues between President Masisi and former President Khama, and knowing very well that former President Khama is in his own country, South Africa, where President Ramaphosa is currently the head of state, and he has a duty to try and resolve that impasse that is there in Botswana between these two former presidents. It's also, in a way, involved a certain business person in South Africa whom was linked to allegedly trying to fund a coup within that particular country and funding opposition parties, and her close relationship with former President Khama within that particular country. So it tells you that South Africa is involved with that particular situation, and South Africa has to find and work hard to find a solution between President Masisi and former President Khama, no matter how long it takes, knowing very well that former President Khama has sought refuge in South Africa, just like Emerson Mnangagwa, President Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe, when he was faced with a political onslaught with late former president of Zimbabwe, former President Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He sought refuge in South Africa when he was ultimately fired as the deputy president of that country. When he went back, when they had won the conference of ZANU-PF, he went back to Zimbabwe from South Africa. So many political leaders within the African continent do seek refuge in South Africa and do seek assistance from South Africa in order to try and resolve whatever political impasse there is within their countries. You'd go back, Kaya, to when Zimbabwe was faced with a situation between MDC of the late Morgan Tsvangirai and Robert Gabriel Mugabe of ZANU-PF, how former President Thabo Mbeki was integral in resolving the problems of Zimbabwe, in having later on the former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai installed as a Prime Minister and having Robert Mugabe as the president of Zimbabwe. So South Africa has played an integral part in negotiations within the African continent, and it would not be the first time that we are placed in a situation like this, where now President Cyril Ramaphosa has to mediate between former President Khama and President Masisi.
All right, thank you so much indeed to my colleague there, Samgele. Obviously, quite a number of issues really between the two heads of state, and of course, we do know that South Africa currently is a chairperson of the SADC organ responsible for security, defense, and political cooperation as well. So it's really in the interest of South Africa to make sure that there is stability in Southern Africa. But at this point in time, I can tell you this much, Desiree, quite a number of officials are streaming in here. We are all still keenly waiting for the arrival of the heads of states right here at the OR Tambo building. So quite a lot to look between Gaborone and Pretoria, especially because when you look at the footprint as well of South African entities that are right in Botswana. So this is quite important. In fact, just to quote President Masisi before leaving Gaborone, he spoke about trade will dominate their discussions right here in Pretoria in South Africa.